In the heart of East Asia, two ancient civilizations stand facing each other across a narrow stretch of water, the world's newest and most dangerous front line. China and Japan, once connected by centuries of cultural exchange, trade, and diplomacy, now find themselves locked in a tense, silent battle for regional dominance. Their conflict is not declared, their armies do not fire upon each other, but the air between them vibrates with military exercises, territorial standoffs, cyber operations, economic pressure, and political warnings. It is a conflict shaped by history, driven by nationalism, and propelled by the global race for power. And most dangerously, it is happening at a time when the world is distracted, divided, and unprepared. China, now the world's second-largest economy and the fastest expanding military power on Earth, sees the 21st century as its moment, a chance to reverse what it calls the century of humiliation and reclaim its place as Asia's natural leader. Japan, rebuilt from the ashes of World War II into one of the world's richest nations, is determined not to bow to Beijing's rising influence. And after decades of pacifism, Japan is now remilitarizing at a speed not seen since 1945. The United States, bound by treaty to defend Japan, stands between them, turning their rivalry into a potential global conflict. This is the story of two nations whose past has never died, whose future is colliding, and whose actions may shape the fate of the Pacific and possibly the entire world.
To understand why China and Japan remain trapped in an endless loop of anger, fear, and mistrust, we must return to the darkest period of their shared history. For centuries, China viewed itself as the Middle Kingdom, the center of Asian civilization, while Japan saw itself as a rising island nation seeking recognition and influence. Tension built slowly through trade disputes, cultural competition, and political misunderstandings, but everything exploded in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Japan's rapid modernization under the Meiji Restoration turned it into Asia's first industrial military powerhouse. In 1894, Japan shocked the world by defeating China in the First Sino-Japanese War, taking Korea and Taiwan. For the Chinese, this was a humiliation that left wounds still felt today. But the worst was yet to come. During World War II, the Japanese invasion of China unleashed some of the most brutal events in modern history. The Nanjing Massacre, biological warfare experiments, forced labor, and widespread civilian atrocities. For China, these memories are not distant history. They are taught in schools, broadcast in media, and embedded in national identity. For Japan, these events remain politically sensitive, often debated, sometimes denied, and always controversial. This unresolved history fuels every modern disagreement, every dispute about islands, airspace, textbooks, apologies, and military activity. It is a conflict kept alive not only by governments, but by national pride and generational trauma. Chapter 2: The Dragon Rises. Fast forward to the 21st century. China has risen from poverty to global power in a single generation. Its navy is now the world's largest. Its missiles can strike every U.S. base in the Western Pacific. Its economic influence stretches from Africa to South America. And its political leadership has made one message clear: China intends to dominate the Indo-Pacific by any means necessary. To Beijing, Japan is a strategic obstacle, a U.S. ally, a technological superpower, and a nation that refuses to accept Chinese control over the region. The East China Sea has become the main flashpoint. Here, the two countries dispute ownership of a tiny chain of uninhabited islands, the Senkaku Islands, known in China as the Diaoyu. These islands have no residents, little land, and few resources, but they hold enormous symbolic power. For China, controlling the islands would mean pushing Japan and the U.S. Navy further away from mainland China. For Japan, losing them would be a national humiliation and a threat to its security. Every month, Chinese Coast Guard ships enter waters claimed by Japan. Every year, Chinese fighter jets test Japanese air defenses. Every week, Chinese state media warns Japan against provoking conflict. And every time China expands its military power, Japan sees a shadow of the past returning. China's strategy is simple but effective: constant pressure, slow expansion, and psychological dominance. Beijing does not need to invade Japan. It only needs to convince the world that China is inevitable and Japan is powerless.
For decades after World War II, Japan embraced pacifism. Its constitution forbade offensive military action, relying heavily on the U.S. for defense while focusing on becoming an economic powerhouse. But that era is over. Under rising fear of China's aggression, North Korea's nuclear threats, and global instability, Japan has begun the most significant military transformation in its modern history. Defense budgets are rising at record speed. Japan is purchasing hundreds of advanced missiles, F-35 stealth fighters, Aegis destroyers, and long-range strike capabilities. It is developing hypersonic weapons, upgrading its navy, and working closely with the U.S. and other Pacific partners. Most importantly, Japan has reinterpreted its constitution to allow collective self-defense, meaning Japanese forces can now fight alongside allies even outside Japanese territory. This is a historic shift with massive consequences. China views this as a threat, while Japan sees it as survival. Any conflict between China and Japan involves three nations, with the U.S. obligated to defend Japan under the U.S. Japan Security Treaty. This means a war in the East China Sea could instantly transform into a war between the world's top two superpowers, the United States and China. American bases in Japan form the backbone of U.S. strategy in the Pacific. To China, these bases are daggers pointed at the heart of the nation. To Japan, they are a shield that prevents China from asserting total dominance. The U.S. expects Japan to take more responsibility for its own defense. If China were to strike the Senkaku Islands or blockade Japan's shipping lanes, the U.S. would be forced to respond out of strategic necessity. Letting China defeat Japan would mean surrendering the Pacific. This triangular balance of power is fragile. A miscalculation by any one of the three could ignite a conflict that spreads far beyond Asia.
The world is witnessing an arms race that receives little global attention, but may be the most dangerous in modern history. China builds warships faster than any nation on Earth. Japan is developing world-class missile defenses, stealth jets, and anti-ship weapons. South Korea is strengthening its military in response to North Korea, but is inevitably drawn into the China-Japan rivalry. Taiwan watches with fear. The Philippines and Australia are choosing sides. Even small island nations across the Pacific are being pressured into alliances. This arms race is not driven by ideology or religion. It is driven by geography, economics, and historical pain. China wants to push the U.S. military away from its coastline. Japan wants to ensure China cannot threaten its shipping routes or its sovereignty. The U.S. wants to prevent any one nation from dominating Asia. The pieces are moving simultaneously, like a massive chess game played on sea and sky. The most dangerous element of this race is technology. Both China and Japan are investing heavily in drones, cyber warfare, satellites, hypersonic missiles, and artificial intelligence. In a future conflict, AI-guided weapons may make split-second decisions faster than humans can react, increasing the risk of escalation from a small encounter to a full-scale war. The East China Sea is becoming one of the most militarized regions on Earth, and the world barely notices. While military tensions rise, another war is already happening, an invisible economic struggle. China is Japan's largest trading partner. Japan is one of China's most important sources of advanced technology, machinery, and investment. Both countries rely on each other, yet both fear dependency. China uses its economy as a weapon. It restricts imports. It threatens boycotts. It uses rare earth minerals as leverage. When Japan arrested a Chinese fishing boat captain in 2010 during a dispute over the Senkaku Islands, China halted rare earth exports, crippling Japanese electronics manufacturers. This single act showed Japan how vulnerable it was. Japan responded by diversifying its supply chains, investing in Southeast Asia, and forging tighter economic ties with India, Australia, and Europe. The goal: reduce dependence on China without triggering open conflict. This economic war is subtle but powerful. Every trade agreement, every factory relocation, every investment deal is part of a larger strategy. It is a form of warfare that does not use bullets, but can be just as destructive. No issue in Asia is more explosive than Taiwan. For China, Taiwan is a renegade province that must be reunified by force if necessary. For Japan, Taiwan is a buffer zone that protects the sea lanes carrying food, energy, and industrial supplies to Japan. And for the US, Taiwan is a critical part of the global semiconductor supply chain and a symbol of democratic resistance. If China attacks Taiwan, Japan will be directly affected, economically, militarily, and politically. Japanese leaders have said openly that a Taiwan emergency is a Japan emergency. In plain terms, if war breaks out over Taiwan, Japan will likely join the fight, voluntarily or not. China knows this. It conducts military exercises that simulate blockades, amphibious assaults, and missile strikes. Japan watches each drill with unease. If China successfully takes Taiwan, Japan could find itself surrounded, cut off, and at the mercy of Beijing's influence. Thus, Taiwan is not just a separate issue, it is a central domino. If it falls, the entire balance of power in Asia collapses. Military strategy is one thing, history is another. But the real fuel behind China-Japan tensions is nationalism, a powerful force that can override logic, peace, or diplomacy. In China, nationalism is tightly linked to the idea of recovering from past humiliation. Never forget national shame is a common political slogan. The government uses patriotic education, war films, and historical narratives to keep the memory of Japan's wartime atrocities alive. This memory forms the emotional backbone of modern Chinese identity. In Japan, nationalism is more complex but equally strong. A younger generation, tired of apologizing for a war they never lived through, is embracing a more assertive national identity. Political leaders emphasize Japan's right to defend itself. Conservative groups want Japan to become a normal country with a powerful military. And the fear of China, its power, its behavior, its history, pushes nationalism even further. When nationalism rises on both sides, compromise becomes political suicide. Leaders cannot back down without angering their citizens. And when nations cannot compromise, they drift toward confrontation. The Senkaku/Diaoyu Islands are small, uninhabited, and seemingly insignificant, but they are a symbol of everything that divides China and Japan. China sees them as stolen territory. Japan sees them as sovereign land. The US sees them as a test of its credibility. Every day, Coast Guard ships chase each other around these rocky islands. Every week, fighter jets scramble in response to airspace incursions. Every year, politicians from both countries make symbolic statements that raise tensions further. This is the most likely place in the world where the next major war could begin. A collision between ships, a misfire by a nervous fighter pilot, a misunderstanding between commanders. One small accident could trigger a chain reaction no one can stop.